All right. I'm sorry that we have such a small audience here for a topic which I think should be of interest to students on this campus. Robin Moore, who will be introduced by Professor Bauer in just a minute, will speak, of course, on Rhodesia. His point of view may be different from many of the audience's point of view. We're hoping to have some discussion of this important issue on this campus during this year. Differing points of view, and I urge you to approach the Committee on Lectures with proposals, or a proposal, since we're limited in funds, a proposal for a lecture with a different point of view. But what disturbs me is that so few in our campus are interested in a number of these areas that are extremely important to the world and to America especially. But I will remind you that we had the other night a speaker on economics, on the subject of entrepreneurship and research. We had a very tiny audience, and the next day he was announced as a Nobel Prize winner, which upsets me a little bit in terms of the university audience. I shouldn't be lecturing to you people who have come to church on Sunday, and I just want to remind you to try to get people interested in subjects I think of exceeding importance to university audiences. So much for my sermon tonight, but I just wanted to express that view. Professor Bauer.
Thank you, Dr. Lowry. Tonight we are privileged to have as a speaker Mr. Robin Moore, who is a distinguished author, has published a number of books which have been very popular, included among them The French Connection, which achieved a great deal of notoriety through film. He is also the author of a book entitled The Green Berets, and various other books. He, for a long time, was involved in television productions of various sorts, and he has lived in many different parts of the world, including the area about which he is going to speak this evening. He has, in fact, a residence in Salisbury in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, and that residence has served as sort of an unofficial American embassy in the absence of any official American representation to the current regime in Rhodesia. I think, without further ado, on behalf of the Committee on Lectures, I would like to welcome Mr. Robin Moore.
Thank you, John. Well, I must say I'm appreciative to everybody that is here for relinquishing the World Series, homecoming week, and all the other great activities going on the campus that I've seen since I've been here today. I wonder if I would have come to hear me if I was in your place, seeing what great things there are to do. Since we have a smaller audience, I think that perhaps this lecture can take the form of very shortly after I've talked a while of a discussion group, because I have a feeling that there are many people in the audience who may know things I don't know about this subject, or may have words that they would like to say. They may want to question me on some of my statements, and I've always felt that the most valuable type of inducement a lecturer can offer to his audience is their opportunity for the audience to have their say too. So with that in mind, make any notes or mentally or on a piece of paper that you would like to question me about later, and you can have at me after I've had a few words to say up front, so to speak. I've always found that when I come and give a lecture or when I talk to people about a subject, whether it be Rhodesia or what else, they say, how did you ever come to be a writer? And even as a writer, how did you come to write this particular book, or how did you get involved in this subject? I might just briefly recap some of the books I've written which led to Rhodesia, how they came about, because it'll give you perhaps a little better idea of where I'm coming from, and it might even make you understand me a little better and understand my point of view. But I always wanted to be a writer. When I was at Harvard, the professor of writing there, the top man in the university, told me after I'd been accepted into his course, that I'd never be a writer, and would I give my seat to someone else who was more deserving, since there was only room for 20 people. And I quickly gave up my place in this distinguished class of creative writing and went on to write ever since. I don't believe anybody in the class ever did, including the professor, ever went on to write anything, but I did take pains to send him a copy of each book that I wrote that did well, autographed, and unfortunately, and it had nothing to do with me or my book, the poor fellow committed suicide. He jumped out of a hotel in Boston and killed himself. It really wasn't because I kept sending him my bestsellers, but anyway, one does have to make one's own way in the area of writing. It was very hard to start out as a writer. I got out of Harvard and started first in the television business. 3 or 4 years I wrote ad lib lines for the amateur hour and things of that sort. Finally, I went back home to Boston and took a job with the Sheraton hotel chain. I was the advertising and public relations director. I progressed remarkably fast to become vice president in 3 years. Those that didn't appreciate my talent said it was because my father was the chairman of the board that I made such rapid strides, which I always felt was a very uncharitable viewpoint of my business abilities. However, while working for Sheraton, I was sent down to Jamaica in the West Indies, and that was my first real acquaintanceship with countries outside of the United States, what we call third world countries now. While I was down there negotiating for a Sheraton hotel, I was always interested in flying. I started an air charter service. The air charter service, it turned out, became a gun-running operation for Fidel Castro. I didn't realize it, and it particularly distressed me that my pilots were not cutting me in on the take. We were supposed to be merely flying tourists up to do a little gambling in Havana, and the next thing I realized, this plane would come back every so often with a few bullet holes in the side of it. The local head of police in Montego Bay would look at it and get a little upset. I finally cut that out, sold the airplanes, but wrote a book about gun running in Cuba and about Castro's guerrilla warfare campaign, which I got fairly much involved with, called The Devil to Pay. The Devil to Pay was the first book, and probably one of the more definitive books, on Fidel's use of guerrilla warfare, psychological warfare, to take over Cuba in a relatively bloodless manner. All the blood was shed after he took over and lined them up against the wall and shot them. But as a result of that book, which was published in 1961, and I might add, by this time, the chairman of the board of Sheraton called me in and said he thought I'd do better elsewhere. I was living in Jamaica, running a bar, and wondering what the next book would be when I heard about these men in green berets that were fighting the war over there in Southeast Asia. And at just that time, Vice President Johnson arrived in Jamaica. This was 1962, August, for the commemoration of that country's independence. I met the Vice President. I gave him a copy of my book, The Devil to Pay. I gave a copy of The Devil to Pay to everybody connected with him and said I wanted to write a book about the Green Berets. Well, apparently The Devil to Pay paid off for me because I was given permission if I would go through the guerrilla warfare school, if I would go through jump school. I was 37 at that time. And that was getting through. There must be at least one paratrooper in this room who probably went over Puke Hill a few times at Benning. But anyway, I did it, and then went to Vietnam and spent 6 months there with the Green Berets. I was a civilian. I was able to keep my civilian status. And the reason I was able to get such good information was that I had gone through the training with everybody. All my friends are now running the war, and I had a grandstand seat. I almost got killed a few times, but that was part of the game. And this was how the Green Berets came about. While I was over there, I did a stint with a CIA group who was working in Laos. And while with them, we were trying to get these little Montagnard types to fight the communists coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The only way they'd fight is if we'd sell their dope for them. Their specialty was growing opium. This had been 2,000, 3,000 years of culture, but these fellows were used to taking a 3-month walk to Vientiane with their wares, selling them and coming back. We used airplanes and sold all their dope for them in a matter of 3 days and kept them out there fighting. But when that was over and I came back to the United States, I began to wonder, my God, I was a dope peddler now. What did this mean? And I got in touch with some friends in the New York Police Department and asked them, what's the story on heroin and opium? And I met 2 cops, Popeye Egan and Sonny Grasso. And after spending a couple of years with them, I got involved in what was known as the French Connection case, and that was how I happened to write The French Connection. As I say, one book leads to the other. While writing The French Connection, I saw a great deal of the highest level area of the narcotics business throughout the world, coming from Turkey, coming from the Golden Triangle of Laos, Burma, and Thailand. And I saw that this money was used in politics, that politicians were supporting the dope peddlers in return for the money to support their campaigns. The more I got to see the penetration of crime into the American lifestyle, the more interested I became in it, and from that came the Fifth Estate, because organized crime has indeed become the Fifth Estate in American life today. Again, crime led me to the Middle East, where I was extremely interested in oil, gold smuggling, and that sort of thing. I wrote a book called Dubai, which is being made into a movie right now. This was as a result of 6 or 8 months on the Persian Gulf, watching the way the sheikhs were getting rich, the American carpetbaggers were getting rich, everybody getting involved with them was getting rich. And it was at this point that I got some inkling of what went on in Africa. There was a great deal of commerce between African nations and the Middle East, and particularly in South Africa and Rhodesia, where they desperately needed oil. Rhodesia, by this point, had sanctions. The world was against Rhodesia, was not selling oil to them, and Rhodesia was using its not inconsiderable gold bullion supply to buy its oil from certain sheikhs that I got to know. This got me interested in Rhodesia. I came back to the United States, finished Dubai, was sitting around wondering what the next book would be when I got a phone call from a fellow I hadn't seen since we were up in Laos, a former CIA man, one of the greatest Green Berets I had ever known, named Colonel Gillespie. And Gillespie said, "I'm out of the agency now. I'm out of all these things." He said, "We have got to understand Africa better. We must particularly understand Southern Africa better. It is the most strategic and important part of the world to us now that we've managed to lose Southeast Asia. And let you go over there, write a book, and I'll come over there and be your research assistant. I'll help you carry your bags, whatever you want." He said he had at that time a public relations agency in Washington. What I didn't know was that the public relations agency was still a CIA cover. He was a full colonel in the CIA at the time, and they were too smart for him in Rhodesia. They wouldn't let him or anybody else in. But when he came in as my research assistant, because they wanted me to write a book which would do for Rhodesia, which would do for Southern Africa in the Western world, what the Green Berets had done, what French Connection had done, explain to people what it was all about. And so old Gillespie and I pitched up there in 1976 in August. I soon realized the enormous importance of Southern Africa to the United States, to every American citizen. And I decided, by George, this is an important place for me to stay. I bought a home, a big house, which I used the ill-gotten gains from one of my books, The Happy Hooker, to finance. My favorite whore finally came through for me and made me an ambassador. Albeit I was not recognized by the U.S. Department of State. Certainly Andrew Young particularly despised me, and vice versa. And I never lost an opportunity to mouth off from my embassy in Salisbury. But facetious though it may sound, I was really trying to do something important. People said to me, and still ask me, what did I expect to find when I went to Rhodesia? Well, I expected to find a racial war going on, blacks against white, Ian Smith's white government fighting the black nationalists, and I expected to find a number of mercenaries. I knew at least there were 300 Americans over there. I knew there were Brits. I knew that there were probably 2,000 to 3,000 white mercenaries totally in Rhodesia. This is what I expected, and I said, well, it'll make a great book. It'll be Beau Geste. But this isn't what I found. I found that I had the same misconceptions that so many Americans have today. We perceive Rhodesia in just the terms which I outlined in the way I thought it would be. Once I'd set up my embassy, I found out, for instance, that all the foreign troops there were being paid at the same rate that the Rhodesian troops were being paid. In other words, they weren't mercenaries from a monetary point of view. They believed in what they were doing. They believed they were fighting a war, not a white against black war, but basically a war that would end up being a war between the moderate black African and the communist black African. And they sincerely believed that they were fighting an extension of the war in Vietnam or the war in Korea. This surprised me, that they were not mercenaries in the point of view that they were making money. So I turned my embassy into a meeting place for them. I had a telex system between Washington, New York, and Salisbury. They could come to my house and find out the scores of all the football, baseball games, basketball games. I had them all sent over by telex. I got in touch with their families to let them know they were all right. When some of them were killed, I conducted memorial services for them, and really became a great part of that operation there. I was one of the very few, one of three Americans, or rather foreigners, who were allowed to go at will around the country, to go to the sharp end, as the combat area is called, where I could indeed bear arms with the Rhodesian army. They wouldn't have me out there without a weapon because they couldn't afford a bodyguard. This is the same thing that happened in Vietnam. So I saw a great deal of the war, and one of the first things that interested me was that of the troops fighting for the government, at that particular time it was Ian Smith's government, were about 4/5 black and 1/5 white. And much of the time I was out in the jungles, I would be maybe the only white man with 5, 6, or 8 RAR, that's Rhodesian African rifle types, or that sort of situation. It was a very interesting thing to watch them engage the communist enemy of Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo. And rather naively, I asked them in one of my first engagements where they did a remarkable job of shooting up a group of the communists, doesn't this bother you to shoot your brother blacks? And they said, well, you know, it never seemed to bother the French and Germans shooting each other. It never seemed to bother any of the Europeans killing each other, the Russians and the Germans, and we feel the same way. It's not a war, it's not a racial war. And I began to get the feeling that this is true. It wasn't a racial war. I then went out into the fields, out into the farms of Rhodesia, and I think this is what Rhodesia really is all about. Out in the wilderness where these families or their fathers or their grandfathers, or going back 5 generations, had carved farmland out of absolute virgin wilderness. Where there had been nothing but jungle, there were farms, and some of the farms I went to had only been cleared out in the last 10 or 15 years. But in every case, the great agricultural properties of Rhodesia, which make it the breadbasket of Africa, certainly for the sub-Sahara Africa, it's probably the only country in all of Africa, except perhaps South Africa, that is not only self-sufficient but can export food, even though they are under sanctions and legally cannot export food. But this is how Rhodesia was created. People going in there, creating farms, creating industry where there was none before. And I saw the hard scientific work that went into this sort of thing. Now, again, here I am in Ames, Iowa, talking about Rhodesia, and I'm sure you wonder what, in goodness sake, does Rhodesia mean to me in Iowa, or for that matter, any other part of the United States. But Rhodesia and southern Africa are indeed one of the most strategic parts of the world still left to the free world. If we lose that, we are in deep trouble. For instance, all the oil that comes into the east coast of the United States, into the United States, for that matter, all of the United States, has to come around the Cape of Good Hope. There are about 11 to 15 miles of navigable waters south of the Cape of Good Hope, and through this, every oil tanker has to come. Now, I've sat there in southern Africa, South Africa, and watched the monitoring of these ships. They can monitor every submarine that comes through, every boat that comes through. They know what's coming through. If a hostile power should be situated down there in the very southernmost area of Africa, they could stop any boat at will from coming through anytime they wanted to. Now, that's one of the things it means to us, but even more important are the strategic metals. Southern Africa, and specifically Rhodesia, is the only producer of the highest grade strategic chrome in the world today. Now, the difference between the strategic chrome that's produced in Rhodesia and the lower grade chrome that's produced in Russia is that the industry that make the steel, the metals industry, the armament industry, if they have to process their steel without the highest grade chrome, it suffers in a military situation. If you take 2 tanks, one made with Russian chrome and one made with Rhodesian chrome, it would be very much like the old wars of the Bronze Age when the bronze sword cut through the copper sword. The same is true with this type of chrome. We have to have it. Rhodesia and South Africa are the chief suppliers for tungsten, which is what we need for the leading edge of supersonic airplanes. There are many invaluable strategic materials that come from there that don't come from anywhere else. Or if they do come from anywhere else, they are a lower grade of strategic chrome or a strategic tungsten. Oh, these are some of the reasons why it's important to us. We could lose a war, a technological war, without the strategic metals from southern Africa. And that is one of the reasons why the United States government, at the same time it tries to a certain extent, pander to some of the governments of Africa and keep sanctions on Rhodesia. At the same time, we know we need it. As I say, this is what is so important to us. This is what the London conferences are all about now. You've probably, I would expect, maybe you've been reading a little about it. But let me just give you a little look at what's going on in London right now. There are three basic parties to the London conference, which will decide eventually what will happen to all South Africa and Rhodesia. Rhodesia is the key to South Africa. At the moment, there is the so-called Patriotic Front, the communist-supplied, the communist-oriented guerrillas. Their leaders are Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo. Joshua Nkomo distinguished himself by shooting down 2 civilian aircraft and then having his men kill the survivors, shoot them or bayonet them when they came out of the plane. Robert Mugabe, the co-leader of the Patriotic Front, is a rather psychopathic individual. When he was in jail for plotting the demise of Ian Smith, probably with good reason, he got very sick. He had a case of syphilis, which became cancer, and had to have his genitals cut off. Unfortunately, a white doctor did this, and this has caused him to have a rather bad view, to put it mildly, of the whole white Rhodesian situation. Now, these are the Patriotic Front, but you've got to also realize that between the two of them, they are bitter enemies, and both Mugabe and Nkomo are saving the best part of their army to fight each other once they, when as and if they come into Zimbabwe and take it over. Now, on the other side is the government made up of Bishop Abel Muzorewa, who was elected in April, and his 2 main rivals, but still they work together, the Reverend Sithole and Chief Jeremiah Chirau. Now, these 3 I know very well. They came to my house. I would say that I had something to do with getting them together, and instead of working at cross purposes to come together and make some kind of a coalition, which could then become a government of Rhodesia. In April, Muzorewa, Chirau, and Sithole ran against each other in elections. Muzorewa was elected. 63% of the electorate of Rhodesia voted, and this is a bigger voting turnout than the United States has managed to muster in the last 2 or 3 presidential elections. Now, this shows that there is a legitimacy to the black moderate government of Rhodesia, which is now in power and which is now in negotiations in London with Lord Carrington and the British. The whole idea is to get some sort of a constitution that they can live by. The constitution that was voted in or ratified in the elections in April give the whites what is considered to be a proportionate, more than a proportionate share of power. And this indeed may be true. But on the other hand, it is the whites that have built the country up to where it is today. I'm not taking sides on this. I'm just trying to put for your inspection what the 3 negotiating parties are. Now, the Patriotic Front walked out of the talks twice. Basically, their biggest disagreement on the Constitution is that it provides the whites to be paid for their land should it be expropriated. I'll get into that a little later. But these are the three sides. Ian Smith is part of the Musarewa government. When I was over in London recently, they told what might be an apocryphal story about the various people all arriving in London. There was Musarewa, Mugabe, and Nkomo, and Ian Smith, and each one of them wanted the same size hotel suite to be equally important. So they finally found 4 suites exactly the same in the Claridge Hotel, one above the other. And then the argument came, well, who's going to have the top suite, because that's the most important. And Nkomo reported, he said he'd shoot down the next airplane that came over London if he didn't get it. Mugabe said he'd kill everybody that came out of the hotel. Smith didn't say anything. Musarewa, being a minister of the cloth, said he'd take what he could get. So Mugabe got the top suite. Under him was Nkomo, under him was Musarewa, and then finally in the bottom was Ian Smith. Now, all of these people had been told about the fierce bugging activities, the electronic surveillance that went on, and so they each one inspected their suite at great length to see if they were being bugged. Mugabe at the top had a bugging kit specially given to him. He went through his suite. He couldn't find any evidence that he was being bugged. Well, then he got mad that he wasn't important enough to be bugged, but continued to search, and finally, to his delight, just before he went to bed, he found under the carpet in the living room a screw, a brass screw, and he'd been told that this is the way you bug things, an induction coil attached to a screw. So he took a screwdriver and took the screw out of the floor, put it in his pocket, and went to bed feeling very happy. The next morning, over breakfast with Nkomo, he said, well, we've got fine accommodations. It's a great hotel. And Nkomo said to him, I think it's a terrible hotel. Last night, the chandelier fell on me. Well, the Mugabe faction, as you probably have read, walked out on the talks over specifically the question of the paying the white farmers for any land that's expropriated. The British said that they would put up a fund, the British and Americans together, to pay for any land expropriated. And at first they didn't want them to be paid even by the British and the Americans. Finally, apparently there has, just yesterday, come some sort of an agreement in which, yes, if the British and Americans will put up the money to pay the white settlers, and we shouldn't use that word settler, I just use it, but I shouldn't, because these are people that didn't settle there. They created their lands. But in any way, to pay the whites to divide up their estates into small holdings so that the land can be better distributed. Now, I think this might be one of the worst things that the United States could do, certainly Britain. I don't see why the taxpayers of the United States should pay what's going to end up being at least a $500 million bill, probably more, to pay to get the whites off of these large farms, which are so efficient, and turn the country into basically a socialist Marxist commune, which will make it just the way Zambia, just the way so many of the other countries are there, Kenya, where when the land is all divided up, they cannot farm efficiently, and you get a situation where you have starvation. All the and the money. That's probably a good reason for not having a debt to any other country. It's a sophisticated economy. It can indeed afford, if such a thing is going to come about as expropriating land and paying off the landholders, which I deplore the whole idea of that, but the Rhodesian government, which presumably will be run by a coalition of the Patriotic Front and Musarewa, certainly can afford to pay them. Now, what happens if the United States and Britain puts up the $500 million or whatever it takes? And I think that's a very low estimate. I would say that the land in Rhodesia is worth today as much as all the farmland in Iowa. And I'm sure that all the farmland in Iowa is worth at least $500 million. So there's no reason why we should pay for this. But if we do, and if Britain does, what will happen is this coalition of Patriotic Front and the others will merely take the money that they should have used for paying off the whites and put it in their own bank accounts into the Switzerland or wherever it is. This has been the tradition, and I see no reason why we won't see this happen further. I just hope that the Congress of the United States totally and absolutely refuses, and we should be doing it right now before those talks are over, let them know that we aren't about to have Americans pay to communize Rhodesia. If they want to do that, if Zimbabwe wants to do that, they can afford to do it themselves. Something we should all watch carefully to see what will happen. The book that I'm trying to finish up now, which I think might be interesting to you when it comes out, The Crippled Eagles, is based upon the foreigners, the men who have come to Rhodesia to fight against the communists, the Patriotic Front as they call themselves. And these consist of old Green Berets, Marines, men with a great deal of combat experience, others who've had none at all and their first military experiences in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. But the interesting thing is that in April, after the elections, after Rhodesia became a black majority rule country, these same men have stayed on, proving that they did not come over there to fight a war for a white government against a black invader. They came there to fight for a way of life they believe in. They're still there. They're still fighting for Muzorewa. The remnants, whatever, the White Army, which makes up 1/5 of the total fighting force, is fighting for Muzorewa and Sitoli and Chief Chirao. And the whole Rhodesian situation could be totally normalized if the United States did one thing, and that would be to immediately recognize the government of Bishop Muzorewa as a legitimate government, cease levying sanctions against them so that they can operate, so that they can sell what they have to sell. And at that point, the Rhodesian government would be perfectly capable of continuing a fight, if that's necessary, against the Soviet and Red Chinese-backed Mugabe and Nkomo faction. Now, one of the big questions people ask is, how come after Muzorewa came in, after he was elected, after we got a black majority rule country in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, why didn't the black troops, the black guerrillas on the other side, lay down their arms and come in and join their black government? They would no longer have to fight. They wouldn't be getting shot at. They wouldn't go through the rigors of the war. Why don't they do it? Well, they don't do it for one very good reason. This is our fault almost totally, the United States. They don't do it because they are told by their leaders, truthfully, that the United States and Great Britain does not recognize the black government. The United States and Britain is helping the Patriotic Front, and not only is the United States and Britain helping the Patriotic Front, but so also is Red China and the Soviet Union. In other words, the whole world is for their side and against the other side. So why shouldn't they keep fighting until they win? At which point, they're told, they will be given all the fine houses and in Borrowdale and the wealthier suburbs of the various cities of Rhodesia. Obviously hollow promises, but they believe it. And that is one of the reasons that the guerrilla war has continued since the elections. And one of the main reasons that the United States, in fact, the reason the United States has not recognized Rhodesia is Andrew Young's efforts in the United Nations to prevent America from doing this. Andrew Young has had a long and deep commitment to both Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo. For 3 years, he's promised them that he'd see to it that they would be the ones that would take over. He has felt a kinship, sympathy to the terrorists because perhaps one reason may be they're the men with the guns, they're the men that are violent, they are the men that are doing perhaps what he would like to have done in the South in the 1960s and couldn't do. But whatever the reason is, over and over again he has told President Carter that if the president does recognize Rhodesia, Zimbabwe Rhodesia now, that he will lose the black vote in the United States. And this is the chief reason why, even though the Senate voted, a majority of the Senate voted to recognize Rhodesia, the president has not done so. Now, there is a law that states, passed by the Senate and the House, that by the 15th of November, President Carter must either recognize Zimbabwe Rhodesia as a country and lift sanctions, or else show that to do this would be a security risk to the United States. Well, it'll certainly be a security risk to his election possibilities, but I don't know how he's going to prove that it will be a security risk to the United States. But this is the chief reason why we have not gone out and done what I believe what most everybody believes they should do, and that is to recognize the current government. I was at those elections, as I said. Some of my colleagues there were Bayard Rustin, Ambassador John Lodge, and many others all went over there to observe it firsthand, and everybody came back with only one exception, saying that the elections were honest, well-run, that the people of Zimbabwe Rhodesia had turned out and voted for this government, that there was no coercion. Yes, trucks were provided to get them to the polls, but that's been going on in the United States since we invented elections. We go out, look what Bobby Kennedy and Jimmy Carter did in Florida last week. They had a war of who could have the most buses to get people to go to the polls. I don't see that there's anything wrong with providing transportation to get people to the polls. That was one of the things the critics of the elections said. There was only one, of all the observers, only one man came out and said that the elections were a monumental fraud, he called them. This was an Indian from India, Lord Chitnis, who was created a peer by the Labor government, who, strange little fellow, he arrived in Salisbury with his girlfriend, incidentally the only one of all of us that felt it necessary to bring girlfriend or wife with us to sustain us through the week, was so upset that he was being put in a hotel that had police guards around it and on every floor, thereby being able to see him and his secretary moving in together, that he moved to a different hotel, stayed in a hotel the entire period of the elections, and then went home to London and called it a monumental fraud. Well, you'd get one of those in almost any situation. But so the point I've made, and I've now talked for 45 minutes, and I'm very anxious to open this up a little bit and let other people have their say. I cannot stress strongly enough that we have seen everything done in Zimbabwe Rhodesia that should be to produce a country, a biracial government, now with the blacks in power, but using white expertise working with them. This has finally been created. It's on the verge of being overthrown by a combination of Russian and Red Chinese radical guerrillas run by Mugabe and Nkomo. And if we don't recognize them soon, if we do not allow them to purchase the supplies they need to demonstrate to the guerrillas in the field that they can now put down their arms and come in and lead a peaceful life with a black majority rule country, government, then we are going to lose Rhodesia. it will become a communist country, we will be denied the strategic metals, and then will come a racial war, with Rhodesia the launching pad for the next long-scale and big war, South Africa. Now, South Africa is a whole other lecture. I'm not going to get into it now. I will answer questions on South Africa if anybody wants to ask them. But now, let any of you chime in and give your own views here, and I will answer what I can. Let our Professor Lowry ask the first question, since he is. Whatever they were, they're everything.
They have a sense of commitment, I will grant that. But I don't understand why you want to set that from a different point of view.
Well, the answer to that is very simple. If Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo, who are the leaders of these people, would come into Rhodesia and stand for election, as they were invited to over and over again, to me that would be part of the democratic process. But they don't want to do it. They've said over and over again, we'll take it by the barrel of a gun, because they do not believe they can be elected. Not because the elections are unfair, but because the majority of the Zimbabwe Rhodesian people have had 5 years of watching the terrorist activities of the communists, which are very much like we saw in Vietnam. And I believe it's the terrorist activities, the incredible tortures and the killings by the so-called Patriotic Front, which to me makes them different. But the answer is, all they have to do is come in and stand for election, and they've been asked to, and that's what it's all about. Does that come close to answering? Yes, everybody's got their own commitment. I don't want to. Well, I think they can be committed, but they don't have to do it through the barrel of a gun. They can come in and do it through an orderly democratic process. Nobody's keeping them out. All they're asking them to do is not come in with guns. Well, they may feel that they don't want a democratic process, which is basically what it is. I'll get back if you want to talk again. Yes, in the white jacket. Making a few notes here.
And everything you have said about Mr. Mugabe is not true. Mr. Mugabe never threatened to kill Mr. Smith. It is Mr. Story.
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry. What did you say? Mugabe what?
Mr. Mugabe never threatened, was never tried to, wanted to kill Mr. Smith. It is Mr. Story. The very same puppets like Mzrewa you have right up in Zimbabwe right now. And people like you are the very same whites we don't want in Rhodesia.
Well, let me answer some of your.
Excuse me,
Okay.
I was absolutely furious with everything you say. You are very, I haven't read the books, I'll read them from now on. But I'm not sure what you've written in those books, but what you have said about the hard facts about Rhodesia, I stayed there, I ran away from that country. I was a medical student. I was in prison for 3 weeks for political persuasions myself, and I am not a communist. And people who are fighting there are using Russian guns and they're using Chinese guns, because if they come here to the United States and say, look, we are under terrible oppression, can you help us? All you do is talk and talk and talk. What is Lord Carrington doing right now? And I have not finished. And I find it a shame. I find it a shame that people who believe in democracy are people who lie so much. A literal lie. You lie and you don't even give us the facts about why there is civil war today in Zimbabwe. Why do people, 3-year-old kids, they run away, they leave, and why do they have to go all the way to Russia? And they come back being communists. Is there communism in Zimbabwe? There never will be communism in Zimbabwe. What we're fighting for is a damn right birthright. Those are the facts.
I didn't hear you. Say that again. What you're fighting for is what? What is it?
What we're fighting for in Zimbabwe is not communism, is nothing else. We're fighting for birthrights. And you went to Salisbury in 1976, and you say you bought an estate, and you say those people created the country. Zimbabwe was colonized. They fought it in 1890, led by the diamond millionaire Sir John Ross from England, and they got that land by fighting. And you have had long connections with CIA. I respect CIA very much, as long as they restrict their activities within the United States. But if they go and meddle in countries like they did in Ireland and they're doing that in South Africa, you're going to regret it very much.
Well, okay. I will try to answer that emotional speech bit by bit. In the first place, I told you my story about the bugging was apocryphal, and not it was a story they told not because it was true, but because it illustrated a point. I didn't. I told you that at the beginning. I said this is an apocryphal story. It isn't really a true story. It's one which illustrates a point. It was one I heard when I was over there briefly. So I'm certainly sure you're correct about what hotels everybody is staying in. I'm trying to get, let me finish answering and then you let somebody else. Now, when you say that the nationalists, the guerrillas, the Patriotic Front are not communists, the very basis of the problems in London right now is the desire of the Patriotic Front to take away, to break up all the land holdings and redistribute everything, which happened in other African countries and happened very unsuccessfully to a point where they don't feed themselves and where Rhodesia's been able to feed themselves. That is a Marxist concept, and Robert Mugabe has said over and over again that he wants a one-party Marxist rule in Rhodesia, one-party Marxist rule. Now, this wasn't my idea. This is what he has said, and it's what Nkomo has said. All I'm doing is repeating what they have said almost every day in the London conferences at one time or another. I'm not, it isn't my fault that he said that. I'm just repeating what he said. Now, you say that Rhodesia is a racist government. I'm not saying that. It certainly didn't have a rather racist overtone up until fairly recently. What I was talking about, my whole point here today, is that this year things have changed, and now is the time for us to try to help a racial government becomes successful and not punish it for whatever past deficiencies may have occurred. It isn't the government of Ian Smith anymore. Of the 12 delegates of the government in London, Ian Smith, there are only 2 whites. One is Ewan Smith, and the other one agrees with Musarewa. So I don't see how we can call it racist now. I'm not saying that at one time it was, because I saw when I first came there the signs saying that right of admission can be refused, but that isn't the way it is right now. I think you should go back there. I think they need you. From what you've told me, your training is such that you'd be a very valuable person back there, and just what they need. Well, you've had your own people there. Now, let me ask one other question. You've asked me, and I'd like to answer your questions, and then I'll go on to anything else. As far as the land is concerned, the Netabili chief, Lobengula, gave them, he didn't give it to him, he sold the land, and it was all land which was not being used. You've got to realize that when Cecil Rhodes went up there with that white column, he was the first ameliorating influence between the constant wars between the Netabili and the Shona. Whatever you want to say, at least he stopped the wars for a while. This is all past history. I'm only saying that the land in Rhodesia was created by the people that are on it now, and if you're going to take it away from them, you're going to have chaos. I guess. Now, let someone else. We'll come back to you, but I think you should let somebody else answer a question. I think you've got to give everybody an equal shot. You've had 7. No, I see other people want to ask questions. I mean, you're the only one that can ask a question. Does everybody agree with that? Do you all agree to let him, you speak for all of you? Or do you want him to sit down and let somebody else talk? I want everybody to have a chance. You've had a long chance. I'll come back to you. But I don't think it's fair not to let everybody else talk. Yes. I am hard of hearing, so if you try to... Well, the land is divided about, and you are right, proportionately speaking, the land is divided about 50% to whites, 50% into tribal trust lands. It's about 50-50, yeah. There might be... I said the land. I wasn't talking about proportionately. No, there's 6 million Africans and 230,000 whites, so that makes it disproportionate, I agree. Yes, right there.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I'm not talking to a man who is brutally murdered by fellow men in Zimbabwe. Well, I happen also to come from Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and I am a member of the so-called Patriotic Front, as you call it. But I would like to make some comments before I come to the real point. One, I would like to correct you on these issues. The human element
Well, I've heard them call them terrorists mostly. I haven't heard them...
Another thing I would like to, in fact, to point out again is that you call these people, in fact, communists. How do you define communism? And then you have people in the United States have no right to tell people in Rhodesia what to do. Just as you people in the United States, in about 1775 or 1774, call it whichever date, you fought against these, in fact, capitalists, the British. And then you won. You were at liberty to form the type of government you wanted. Now, the people of Rhodesia, regardless of their status, which you ascribe, well, whatever you do, they have also the right of choosing the type of government they want. Now, on land apportionment, from Bulawayo to Salisbury, all that, well, that is the mindset.
Now, save some time for some other people, so don't...
All that land is, in fact, allotted to the minority, to the whites. In fact,
Let me ask you one question. Are you in favor of sanctions being lifted?
before I sit down, please, next time you give a speech on such controversial issues, try to respect the rights of those innocent people as well.
Now, all right, I won't answer that because you've made a good talk yourself. Who hasn't talked yet? Let me have this fellow right here with the beard. It's your chance, yes. Sit down. Mm-hmm.
Your speech is in general quite materialistic. You are only thinking about Rhodesia, it seems to me, because it's a rich country, because it has chrome, because it has mineral. You're not talking, it seems to me that this is your most important part of Rhodesia. And then my question is, what would happen in other countries, in a poor country? And my idea is that you don't care then about poor countries because they don't have minerals that they are important to the United States. At some point, another, it's I agree partially with him, that the idea you Americans have about communism and socialism is just, I think it's your own idea. It's just you are trying to scare the people. I think that there is a difference between communists, between socialists, and there is a difference. There is a big range you can play with.
All right, that's a good point. Let's see. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I also feel that I think he made a very grievous mistake, by coming here and making this speech, because he had never really got deep down into what is happening in Rhodesia, why the war is being fought. Okay, you never said anything, about the population. Okay, the population is 6 million blacks and 250,000 whites. And there was this 1969 Land Tenure Act, which distributed 44 million acres to whites and 44 million acres to blacks. And he never said anything about that. Okay. And at the same time, he never said anything about people who have been moved in concentration camps. People today are dying. They are being killed in those concentration camps, but you never said anything about it. You said something about 60 people who were killed in a plague because they are white. You mentioned them because they were white. What about all these people who are killed? Today is about 44 people are killed every day, blacks, but you only mentioned white. Is it because you are white? Or you are interested in what is happening in Rhodesia? That's my question.
Well, I don't believe I said that whites were being the ones that are killed. Let me say concentration camps. I don't know any concentration camps unless you are referring to the the camps where they put people to keep them so the terrorists can't get them, which is what we used to call in Rhodesia the protected villages. Now, if that's a concentration camp, anybody was free to leave it any time they wanted to. They didn't want to leave it because they did not want to be out where the terrorists could get them. I don't call that a concentration camp. And also, in 45 minutes, I couldn't say everything there was to say. It took me 6 hours. You haven't had anything to say yet.
It seems to me that one thing you didn't do your homework well before you came here to speak. Now, according to from what you said, one thing, I come from Kenya. You mentioned about Kenya. That is one of the countries where they collect the land together, then distribute it to people.
There's been a certain amount of that, yes.
Yeah, the reservation. One thing is, I don't think, in case you've been to Kenya, you don't know Kenya as much as I know it.
No, I don't. I don't know Kenya.
Right. So that's one point where maybe you could withdraw your remarks. Secondly, it seems to you that the welfare of the U.S. is so much important than the situation of the black man, or rather of the people down there in South Africa. In other words, you'd rather supply the arms, and you'd rather support the government down there, and exploit the black people. And as long as they'll keep you going, as long as they'll keep the economy going up here in the
First place, it's the black government that I'm talking about supporting, Bishop Muzorewa's government. And that, to me, I don't see anything wrong with supporting a black moderate government that was elected by the majority. Now, you made other points, but I'll just say that. Yes, this one. Yeah.
In the first place, we don't approve that there is a black government in Zimbabwe right now.
You don't approve of that black government?
There is no black government there.
Well, it was elected. I mean, maybe you don't approve of it, but it was elected.
Who got the power? What is a government today without an army?
What government do you approve of?
There is no government. There's Ian Smith, is the prime minister right now.
You mean you take the position that the government, Bishop Muzorewa's government,
Brainwash Bishop Muzorewa and put him there just as a black stooge to reflect to the world that there's a black government there. Ian Smith is still in control of the army, he's still in control of the judiciary, he's still in control of the government. He has the veto power, he has the government.
well, there's no indication that that's the case now. It was, but it isn't now.
Just get to see. There's nothing to be educated about.
Well, that's what you say, but I see no indication that that's true at this point.
If there was a black government, Britain would not have called a conference.
Well, there was a black girl. There is one.
Call a conference and go back.
Let the young lady say something. I'm talking about the United States losing it as a friendly government, yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about me personally. I'm talking about the United States losing Southern Africa as a... I'm not talking about me personally. And when you say you mean the United States? Okay, fine.
You mean the United States should not pay to communise Rhodesia? It will pay to communise Rhodesia because it sent mercenaries over there. You were willing to pay to send mercenaries to Rhodesia to kill black people. You were willing to send all these people to go and fight the black guerrillas to kill innocent black people. You should be ready to communise Rhodesia. You're going to pay for all that. And I'm coming with that. White Rhodesians, they don't have too long to last. That's why you're willing to tell all these people, all these lines. They're going to get out of Rhodesia whether they like it or not. And coming to the poverty of Africa, really, we are going to be as poor as Kenya is, like you say, as poor as Mozambique is. What are they doing?
I didn't say Kenya was poor. I just said that they'd broken up the...
Whatever you said, you talked about people starving in Africa. And it's true we are starving. Rhodesia is one of the richest countries in Africa. And it has the highest number of people starving. That is ridiculous.
There's nobody starving in Rhodesia.
People are not starving,
Neither are the blacks. That's why they come in there.
and we are going to redistribute the land and feed the nation, not feed white people. We're going to feed the nation, and if it means we have to run white people out of Rhodesia to have the bread, they'll get out.
Well, that's what happens, and then that causes the whole country to go broke. And but maybe you may agree with David Owen, the recent Foreign Secretary of England, who said it's better to starve and lower your standard of living and get rid of those that you don't want.
We're not going to
Now, who else? I want to get somebody, yes. Yeah, Madam Secretary.
Yeah, rather than have only one American speak, I thought maybe I should say something. I thought it was rather poor coming to the university giving a speech that was what I would call cheap propaganda.
I can only say it's what I saw.
We certainly would have appreciated more logic, especially we would have appreciated more consideration for what we would call justice, rather than giving us the usual knee-jerk communist threat, which is really too frequent from a very right-wing point of view. This country has certainly heard enough of that to almost be immune to it by now. The other thing I would like to say is that very few Americans, I think, have, well, maybe let's go back. Cheap propaganda is you're using jokes about the opposition without actually treating them as individuals. You're using stories, castoration, and so on. This is just typical tricks of cheap propaganda. Instead of helping the situation and trying to understand it and give us some insight and trying to improve a situation, that as Andrew Young, I think, is actually trying to do, you're coming in and making it worse. And I think you're giving Americans very
Well, you're entitled to your opinion, and I've told you what I've seen and lived through for 2 years. And as I said, I was one of the people that helped bring together the Reverend Sitole, Bishop Muzariwa, and Chief Chirao into an organized force, which they'd never been before. And so I must say, I think that I saw what I saw and lived through what I lived through, and my lecture merely reflects what I have seen. I'm sorry I didn't like my little story, but that was supposed to be, as I said once again, it wasn't supposed to be making any great point. It was just a little story on bugging. Now, who hasn't asked one yet? Now, wait a minute. Let's get somebody who hasn't asked one yet. This fellow here hasn't asked one. Yeah, you haven't asked one, have you? Yes, go ahead.
From this speech, I can deduce that you are trying to convince American citizens to support you in trying to establish your ground in Rhodesia. You have a property in Rhodesia.
No, I don't. I did have, but I don't. But anyway, that's beside the point.
At any rate, you have some interest in Rhodesia.
No, I don't. I don't own anything there. My only interest there is that I spent 2.5 years there and wrote a book, or I'm writing a book.
Interest in Rhodesia after all.
All right.
Interest can be anything.
I'm interested, yes, as you are. All right.
So you have some interest in
Well, we have the same interest then.
I don't think you have the same interest with me. At any rate, you have some interest in Rhodesia. Well, I also have some interest in Rhodesia, but the interests are not the same. Anyhow, you would want the American citizens, if they are your fellow American citizens or whatever, you would want them to support you in trying to justify your interest in Rhodesia. As it were, you can deduce from the audience that you feel successfully to put that across. The message didn't get to the people, and you woefully, miserably, broken down. Now, my question is, or what I'm interested in, is wanting to know, let us assume that you lived at the time that the United States of America was fighting this war of independence against the British. In the first place, how would you have described the Americans against the British? Secondly, how would you have described the British against the Americans? Now, try to put the situation at that time, very parallel to that which is happening in Rhodesia right now. We take the Rhodesians as Americans at that time, and then we take the white minority regime as British in the United States at that time in the 18th century. Now, it's the same situation, two parties fighting. You describe the blacks in Rhodesia as terrorists against the white minority regime. And, of course, I don't know how you describe the white minority regime against
I don't understand how the War of Independence impinges upon this situation. I'd like to, but I don't. Let me ask everybody here one question, because I'm interested. How many people are against recognizing the government of Zimbabwe Rhodesia? And I can see all the Africans are against it. Yeah, well, all right. But I'm just curious to see. All right. You have not talked yet. No. All right. Then it's your turn. Let's keep it short because we want to give everybody a shot. We don't want a speech. We want some questions. Of which liberation war? You mean the war in Rhodesia? What is the background of the current struggle?
What led to this war? Why people are fighting it?
The whites were not fighting it. The whites were not doing anything until the what now is the Patriotic Front, formerly was the ZANU and ZAPU parties fighting it from. I mean, it wasn't the whites fighting it; they were protecting themselves at first, and then and their own people, not just whites. But it was not anything to do with a war of liberation at that time. But everybody calls these things wars of liberation. Now, who else hasn't said anything? You haven't, right there. It is true that voters in that election in April were not all registered to vote. They came in if they were there, if they could show that they were, or make the people believe that they were native Zimbabweans and didn't come from some other country, they could vote. But it was an almost impossible task to go out and try to register in a population of 6 million in a short time. So they gave everybody over 18 the opportunity to vote. And I agree, in this country that would be a little bit unorthodox, to put it mildly, but it was about the only way that they could let people vote was not to make them come in and prove that they were a certain age or anything, and I will have to admit, and everybody said the same thing, there's no secret, nobody said that this wasn't true, that in the election that many people voted that weren't registered. Some were registered and some weren't, but everybody got to vote who's got in line and wanted to go through the polls. That is true. I don't see anything wrong with it, but under the circumstances. But now, what was the other question? Could you make it clearer for me?
You said 63% voted. Anyway, you just commented on it, but you failed to ask you where your interest was. But from your answer to this question, could you tell us what prevents people like you from in elections like that is very easy to forge papers to show you are native Zimbabwean? What prevents people like you from coming in and playing those and going to vote, maybe voting 2, 3, 4 times? How do you call that fair election?
I'm not sure I totally understand you, but well, it's true that virtually anybody could vote.
Yeah, then is that a fair election when people like you are around there at that particular time?
Well, it wasn't whether I was there or not.
Come in playing those, voted 2 or 3 times, and now we know where your interest is. I mean, how would you, if you were on the other side, would you like to accept that type of government? Be honest with yourself.
Well, I'm still not totally sure. I'll get to you, but there's this gentleman in the back. He hasn't. You've talked a lot of time. Now let somebody else have a chance. Well, to you it may be a lie. To one man's lie is the other man's truth. I mean, that's what you say, but there are many others that would disagree with you on that. I'm not going around to Kaya. You're next. Don't let him finish. Well, I believe very. Well, you're the only one. I mean, you. I don't have a CIA tie, but I wouldn't mind it, but I don't. I'm trying to breathe a little truth of that a lot of you don't get here. Well, I noticed that everybody in this room practically is against the current government of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and does not want to see sanctions lifted. Well, I would. Well, there's nothing I'm saying that I don't believe or haven't seen and have personal knowledge of. Ask me. Well, I believe that I should come around. No, I don't give them every few days, but I'd like to. Well, you probably don't know the problem, so that's why you're saying that. Well, I'm sorry, that's what we're trying to correct. And the best way to correct it would be to do what I'm suggesting. All right, now we get back to the second round. I don't necessarily accept that, but it's certainly a disproportionate figure.
This election all was fair. Two things. All the people who went to observe were better. Those are the people who were voting government. And why were they getting polls of 115% in Sinoia?
I didn't understand that. What about 115?
In Sinoia, which is not
Yes, I know Sonoya well.
poll of 115% when you had no registered voters, but you got 115%.
You're talking about the elections now? Are you talking about the elections?
Yes.
That they had 115% in Sonoya? Well, in Chicago, everybody in the graveyards vote, so I don't see that that makes it so much different. And there may be election problems. There are in the United States. There are in Rhode. I'm not saying there weren't some misuse of the electoral process there. I didn't say that at all. I just said that they did have a 63% turnout.
My next question, everybody who was opposed to that election, by the way, was locked down. You didn't mention that? And the reason people are fighting right the present parliament now, which you are saying is full of blacks, those are just stupid puppets. If they vote 72 puppets, they out of the 100. If 72 blacks vote without 6 whites voting nothing, it's a no-vote situation. That law cannot be passed. Those are facts about the present government. And the judiciary, the army, the police, all the commissioners, each section has a commission, a commission of 10, and they are all white. This is going to stay like that for 10 years,
May well.
okay? And you're putting it, Smith is driving the car, but he's at the back. And the other thing is this, Lord Shitten, by the way, is a fellow at Cambridge, and he lectures history, politics there. It doesn't come, it does not come from India. It came from India a long time ago. He took no girlfriend.
Yes, he did, because I met her.
That was another lie.
No, it's not.
Don't bring us down to intellect, because it's terrible.
He took her over to the, well, I'll leave that out, but anyway. Now, who hasn't asked one yet? In the back row.
I want to say that as a black American, I feel deeply humiliated for everything that you have broken the state tonight. You have come here, you have propagated lies among this university and no telling how many other universities. How can you do that? How can you say that? How can people sit here and listen to you, just passively sit by and listen to you say what you have said tonight? You are talking about human beings. You are talking about a country. And yet, as a black American, I say that I would rather go to Africa and starve to death as opposed to living in this racist country here. I gotta live under a government who's gonna send someone like you to come preach to me about blacks, about Africans. I don't wanna live here. I hate it. I think you are terrible.
Why do you stay here if you don't like it?
Ignorant things I have heard in my life tonight. If you think I'm emotional, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because yes, I am. I think you are totally, absolutely ridiculous. I think you should go back and maybe regroup your information. Nothing you have said tonight has been able to stand under the criticism of the people who know. Why have you come here? What do you want?
Well, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. You, me, everybody. Mine's based on what I saw. Now, who hasn't had a chance yet? Somebody there. Yeah, there we go. I can't hear you. Can you talk to me so I can hear?
Yes, if she feels humiliated as a black American, I feel 10 times more humiliated as a white American.
Well, you better learn the lessons. Well, I guess I don't see anybody who hasn't had a chance yet. Ah, you haven't had a shot.
No, I haven't. There's a lot of things that I think you did one job of getting people together here to talk about it, and brought up a lot of people's points of view. But something you ought to think about is that Rhodesia and other countries aren't the only third world countries that have land distribution problems. That's the way that Rhodesia is. There's a lot of other countries that way. I don't think it's such a racist thing that's being brought up either. Though it is say that it's because it's a white man, we aren't going to do it. That's involving the United States and their internal politics too. You work it both ways. Where's the United States supposed to draw their line? And what's the patriotic front really planning on doing anyway? You never hear about that, but we're going to help the people. What about all the black countries that are already ruled by blacks that aren't in very good shape? Whatever happened to Uganda and the African Empire? I'd like to know, with their black rule, what happened in there?
Well, let me say that if I've done nothing else, it sounds like I've got a good arguments going, and I hope you'll all talk among yourselves, and you may hate what I said to say, but at least perhaps you'll all take a look and find specific ways to either refute what I've said, but look into it. I think there's nothing better than having good discussions going, and even if you don't like a single word I said, at least I think I've got people arguing, talking, thinking, and I hope you'll keep doing it. And as I say, at least we've accomplished that much, if nothing else. It took 6 weeks in London, and they're still arguing. So I hope you yourselves will keep after it, think about it. And if you want to read my book, you don't have to, obviously. I'll leave one copy here, and you can pass it around. But if anybody wants to talk to me, let's make it informal from here on in, and not